In medicine, we've seen the crash and burn of a newbie in the world of serving others. If you serve others, whether it's in medicine, clergy, counseling, or any place where humans serve other humans, this video is for you. Those newbies in the world of serving others give all of us inspiration. They're high on energy, but their skills for the long-term journey through the stress of serving others, well, those skills are lacking. Maybe it's a lack of maturity, or maybe it's too few trips around the sun, but it is heartbreaking to watch those inspired to serve others crash and burn because they can't sustain the stress. If I'm the physician of that servant of others, my instinct is to prescribe a life void of service of others. And of course, that's ridiculous. But the list of prescriptions that physicians like me have to help people with that chronically stressed life, it'll fill a clinic and will fill a lifetime in the practice of medicine. Living a life plagued with health problems is filled with poor sleep and rising blood pressure and chronic headaches and stretching waistlines and soaring cholesterol levels. All of this leads to a fistful of prescriptions from me. As a physician, my training boils down to a matching game on many days, where the disease is matched with a prescription. If prescription A doesn't work, well, make sure you have the diagnosis correct and then try prescription B. For over a dozen years, I did this, until one difficult patient changed me. Her story altered the course of my practice. She was a typical do-gooder, one of 8 children from a large Christian family. Everyone in her family exemplified how to serve others. They were teachers and administrators and mechanics and soldiers and nurses. Everyone in the family served the Lord, and you could see it in the way that they gave tirelessly to their professions. She did have the purest of intentions, high energy, but her skills fell short regulating her stress. She struggled with thyroid problems, anemia, she had a hysterectomy, chronic headaches, and her health continued to decline. And as her health declined, so did her hours spent serving other people. But it really caught up to her at the age of 61, when she was diagnosed with cancer of her white blood cells. 2 rounds of chemotherapy over the following decade, and she actually stopped serving others altogether to fight for her own life. 1 in every 5 of her white blood cells was crippled from the cancer. And these crippled white blood cells failed to defend their territory. The invaders called pneumococcal pneumonia or West Nile virus or Candida found refuge in her body. For 50 of the previous 52 weeks, I prescribed antibiotics, trying to help her white blood cells keep the bugs from living in her body. But she lost the battle again and again. At her appointment in May of 2015, her cancer was doubling every 6 weeks, and her physical exam revealed lumps of cancer in her armpits, her groin, and her neck. And when I told her it was time to have chemotherapy again, she replied, "I'm tapping out. I am done. I'm not doing that again." This decision was life or death, chemo or no chemo. And as she processed that news, I watched her body language. We stood in the hallway of the hospital as she held the pink slip for her chemotherapy. The 2 halls diverged. One hall led to chemotherapy. This was the path that would traumatize her brain again, causing her to enter into zombie land, where we would pray that she would regain the memories we knew she was going to lose from chemotherapy. But the other hall was the front door, abandoning our privileged access to westernized medicine. This difficult patient standing at the crossroads of medicine is my mom. Despite my private escort of her over the past 10 years, Western medicine had fallen short. She was exhausted and done. And holding that pink slip, I asked her one of the most intimate questions I ever ask a patient. "Mom, do you trust me?" And at first she was flippant and said, "Of course I trust you." But I made her answer the question again. "Mom, do you trust me with your whole life?" She said yes. And I said, "Let's walk out the front door and I'll show you what I would do if I were you." As we exit the front door of the hospital and abandon that expected path, We drove 100 miles to our family farm, and I started with the question, Mom, have you ever heard of a ketone? I explained that a ketone is a unit of fuel that powers your cells. It's like glucose, but ketones come from stored fat, and glucose comes from carbs. Your body needs to live off of ketones for the next 6 weeks. That means no carbs. You can eat all the fat you want, but no carbs. I went on to explain that cancer cells are broken and they can thrive off of glucose. Healthy cells use both glucose and ketones. We need to drop the glucose in your body and starve out your cancer by denying them from so much glucose. But we first need to get your healthy cells to remember how to use ketones. So the 3 greatest reasons that I recommend the ketogenic diet: number 1, reversing their broken cells. Number 2, enhancing longevity. And number 3 is peaking their spiritual growth. When it comes to reversing broken metabolisms today, patients from at least 50 years and older live with the bodies that are the most broken, and they started at younger ages. This generation has had more surgeries and more interventions than ever before. The cause of this decline is processed food. In 1968, Senator George McGovern was deeply moved by a television documentary on starvation in America. McGovern promptly went to work in Congress to abolish hunger in the United States, and he was named the chairman of the Senate Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs. Shortly after embarking on his journey to end hunger, McGovern became acquainted with a low-fat guru named Nathan Pritikin. Almost immediately, McGovern changed from reversing starvation to reversing heart disease, diabetes, and obesity through the Pritikin program called a low-fat diet. In 1977, the McGovern Report gave rise to the first dietary guidelines. It increased carbs, reduced fat, and specifically focused on saturated fat. It reduced cholesterol, sugar, and salt. What was this called? The Food Pyramide. My son attended George McGovern Middle School. Yes, I'm a born and raised South Dakotan, and the shrine to George McGovern's life is housed less than 30 miles from where I grew up on that family farm. The hard-working people of South Dakota praised Senator McGovern for his no-nonsense legislation. Over the next 3 decades, subsidies filled the bottom row of that food pyramid and took my family and many South Dakotans out of a state of near poverty to middle class. George McGovern's policy on promoting grains as the foundation to the food pyramid spread throughout the globe. Abundance of processed foods percolated in every organization that adopted the food pyramid. Organizations that took funding from the government, like nursing homes, prisons, and public schools, all had lunch programs that now had to follow the guidelines of the food pyramid. And other countries followed this advice. Wheat, corn, beans were harvested by the millions of bushels and milled into the tiniest particles. The finer these grains were pulverized, the smoother the texture. Nearly everything that went onto the shelves in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s delighted the palates across the globe, while sparking insulin production in unprecedented levels. Yes, this is where my patients in their 50s and older started to get diseases. They got them from becoming quickly addicted to the processed foods made from flour and pasta, cereals and pastries, and deep within their abdomens, every particle sliding into their gut caused insulin to squirt out their pancreas. That's normal. What wasn't normal is the insane amount of particles and the super small sizes of those particles. The smaller the particle size, the greater the production of insulin. And insulin overloaded their cells. This excess insulin broke their metabolism. Yeah, it broke your metabolism if you've been overeating carbohydrates too. It added chronic inflammation at a cellular level. So, how do you know if you have chronic inflammation at a cellular level? Well, if you added 5 extra pounds of fat, your body naturally produced more insulin to get those 5 pounds in the insulation cells, into your fat cells. And also, as a result of those extra pounds, your body now needs a little bit more insulin. And once that cycle starts, if you gain fat from those small particles stimulating insulin, yeah, that's the bread, rice, pasta, potato game, you must remove those particles, those small particles, to reset the amount of insulin you make. That means taking those carbohydrates to almost zero to not stimulate that excess production of insulin. Without that reset, the chemistry of insulin resistance marks a race to the bottom of a huge pile of medical problems. Without the removal of those small particles stimulating insulin, you'll soon be on my fistful of prescriptions. Yes, that's a broken metabolism, and that's what I mean by one of the top reasons I recommend the ketogenic diet is to reverse this. Because the weight that you put on with excess insulin cannot be exercised away. They must first fix the chemistry. Insulin must be reduced before those fat cells will release the stored energy. With fat tucked into the storage cells, the only fuel available is glucose. If you eat fat in the setting of high insulin, you barely get a chance to even use that insulin before it gets tucked into the next layer of fat cells. Only when eating high fat in the absence of carbohydrates does your body reset the insulin overproduction. If you're still not sure if your insulin's high, study how long your energy lasts from the food you eat. In the setting of high insulin, your glucose fuel shoots up and then crashes down within about 2 hours. If you find yourself adding food for fuel every 2 to 4 hours, chances are you fuel from glucose. Fuel from fat can only burn when insulin has lowered and the glucose is in short supply. Once that happens, you have access to these strings of fat, which can be broken down into burnable units of fuel called a ketone. Ketones as fuel act much like logs on a campfire. Getting that log to start burning can be a bugger. If you've seen an adolescent fire starter, they will throw a bunch of leaves or pine needles into the pile. And you can almost guarantee the age of that fire starter by how much debris is billowing out in the smoke. The less experienced the fire starter, the more it smokes. And this analogy actually fits with people trying to sustain on a ketogenic diet. Those who sputter and start can cause a great deal of debris and trash to churn through their body. This isn't the best approach. Those who step into the change of fuel with a few solid rules of wisdom can find that the benefits of ketosis will pump through their veins in less than 2 days. Instead of a smoke-filled campsite, adding another log to the fire gradually and gracefully lights up the next fire. The fuel lasts not 2 hours, but closer to 6 or 8 hours. So how do you wisely start a ketogenic diet? Rule number 1, no sugar, no starch, high fat, and number 2 is the word 20. 20 is the total number of carbohydrates allowed on a ketogenic diet, at least for the first 6 weeks. No funny business, no net carbs, no subtracting grams of fiber, or strangely eating after midnight, one of those little bars that says the word keto on it, so it must be safe. I need you to 100% tally up the total carbohydrates you eat in a day and keep that number less than 20. Watch what happens to your system within 48 hours. It is miraculous. If you've struggled with weight loss, that is a really important rule. But the third one is my favorite, and that is measure. You will make ketones as soon as your glucose is burned through and your insulin is lowered. And measure that. When you first start making ketones, your ketones will overshoot and you'll spill some extra ones into your urine. Pee on a urine ketone strip and prove to yourself that you're in ketosis. Within 2 weeks, 70% of your cells will have remembered how to burn a ketone as fuel. And this fuel, it lasts all day. As more fat cells empty their stored fuel, hunger disappears, and logs are fueling your brain, your heart, your lung, and your immune system. My mom's first do-gooder job was as a teenage candy striper. She went on to acquire many hats as an X-ray technician, a farmer's wife, a Sunday school teacher, Sunday school superintendent, who also posed as the music leader for the Sunday school. She was the small town parade organizer, and she ran for an elected position of county auditor. She served so much in her corner of the world that some called her the unofficial mayor of the city. True to her generation of do-gooders, she did what many of us do, and she sacrificed her body as she served. She added an extra 20 pounds to her body in her 40s, and she went up to 30 pounds in her 50s. And by the time she was 60, she was over 50 pounds overweight, and that's when the diagnosis of cancer came. The following 10 years added yet another 15 pounds despite her attempt to fight off those crippling health problems and reverse the weight. The devil himself orchestrated those temptations and pulled her away from the acts of service she'd been called to do. And that's why the second reason that I recommend the ketogenic diet is for longevity. You might be tricked into thinking that the word longevity means to live longer. No. My mom's body was aging twice as fast as the clock on the day that we drove to the farm. She surrendered. The devil had won because she stopped serving others to fight for her life. She did not want to live longer. She wanted to go to heaven. Longevity means not just living longer, but to live well longer. If you want to look inside to see who's living well, you don't look at their waistlines or compare blood pressures or even cholesterol levels. The secret to the best health hides inside your mitochondria. Yes, this is the magic of life. This is where I think the Holy Spirit lives. When life inside your mitochondria stops, you will stop living this side of heaven. The better the health inside your mitochondria, the better your body functions. High insulin causes dysfunctional mitochondria and aging. The mitochondria ages faster than they should, and that high insulin does nasty things that land you in my clinic. Those nasty things include grow cancer, they will wilt your brain, and they grow dementia, rattles patients with Parkinson's tremors, and causes suffering through chronic migraines. High insulin adds this debris to the cells inside your heart, your lungs, your liver, your brain, your kidneys, and as well as decreasing your sex drive. Burning only glucose as a fuel pollutes the body like a smoky campfire was polluted by those pine needles and that debris. Those mitochondria learn to burn faster. It overheats the mitochondria and it causes free radicals or rogue electrons to age your body from the inside out. When we got to the farm, I told my mom that being on a ketogenic diet isn't easy. I'll do it with you. It makes it easier for you if you have a partner. So I start my mom on a ketogenic diet, not knowing if her specific cancer follows these rules. We know that breast cancer and prostate cancer and brain cancers are very likely to be fueled with glucose. They're linked to insulin production. But cancer of the white blood cells had no published data in 2015. 6 weeks on the ketogenic diet, and Grandma Rose, my mom, and I returned to the oncologist. The oncologist ran the numbers twice for her cancer. Yeah, at the start of this story, her cancer was doubling every 6 weeks, and she had about a 6-month life expectancy. I had no evidence-based medicine to back me up, but a few things spoke louder to me than any medical article. For the first time in a year, she'd gone 5 consecutive weeks without antibiotics. For the first time in over 3 years, she had the energy to sweep the front sidewalk at the farm, something she cared a lot about. And she was smiling with her eyes for the first time in over a dozen years. And even though we bumbled our way through those 6 weeks, when the doctor came back in and said, "I see you didn't go to chemotherapy," we both held our breath. He finally broke the science and said, "What did you do to lower your cancer numbers by 30%? The final reason that I recommend the ketogenic diet is for your spiritual growth. We use the word enlightenment to mark the peak of our earthly spiritual experience. Functional MRIs scanned during times of enlightenment or right after show the brain tapping into peak moments of function. We can see that all the swelling is gone and that it is a perfectly functioning machine during that enlightenment. Only a few in today's world have experienced this advanced moment of clarity. They describe it as transcending the noise and chaos of our busy world today. I like to describe it as dampening my distractions as the devil watches me with envy. Finding enlightenment frequently occurs in a fasted state. In the Christian faith, we talk about how Jesus fasted for 40 days, and during that time, the devil came to tempt him. If you fasted and found yourself wanting for food more than you usually do, I can tell you that fasting will weaken your defenses when you first learn how to strengthen this skill. During my fast, my guard gets down, and I describe that my flesh is weak and my desires rule my brain. And the longer I do this, the more I practice this, that skill of denying those temptations gets easier. But that's not the core reason for why connecting a spiritual enlightenment with a ketogenic diet. Throughout the globe, prayer and fasting have been connected. And when we look for enlightenment, it is found in the healthiest of mitochondria, in brains that are void of inflammation. For people fasting today, starting from a high carbohydrate state, it would take days to burn through their stored sugar and lower the inflammation, lower that insulin, so that the cells could be in the place to be enlightened. So their brain could be removed from a swollen state and hit a peak performance called enlightenment. Today's population spends about 90% of their life out of a state of ketosis. They enjoy George McGovern's bread, pasta, rice, pastries, and potatoes. And you can expect that at least 72 hours of fasting are required to remove all of that inflammatory debris and swelling to reach enlightenment. When Jesus walked the earth a couple thousand years ago, most people spent 90% of their life in a state of nutritional ketosis. His diet, like many of the time, were small, fatty fish and preserved meat. Ketosis occurs in a breastfed baby today and in the days maybe prior to a colonoscopy, but most people don't fast and they don't remove those carbohydrates to find a life that is void of inflammation and fueled from fat. However, those who are in a state of ketosis can often reach a state of enlightenment in as quickly as 36 hours. Some report hitting that enlightenment with as little as 12 hours. A miracle from God arrived just in time in my life when I was able to learn about the ketogenic diet in order to walk my mother out of that critical moment. After that 6-week follow-up where her numbers had reduced by 30%, the same amount that was expected to get from chemotherapy, she went another 12 months before she needed chemotherapy again. And this time around, her health was so much better. She beat the odds. She reversed those other health problems I was talking about. She strengthened her immune system, and she lost all that excess weight. But most importantly, she resumed her role in the community as a servant to God. If you want to see those steps that I taught my mom, especially those that are the most critical on the ketogenic diet, I have an online course that you could learn it from. Or check out the books I've written, especially the one written about my mom, Grandma Rose. It's called Any Way You Can, and it comes on audiobook and in paperback. Here on the Dr. Boz Show, we are improving your health one ketone at a time.